I just started the recording now. Okay. So I'd like to welcome Susanna Slivensky and Joanna Pontier. Susanna is based in Austria. Has been working for the Council of Europe since 2005 as Deputy Director and Head of Programs of the ECML. She has a PhD in language education and holds a master's degree in German as a foreign language, Japanese studies, and organizational psychology. In addition to almost two decades of experience in language teaching, she was working with German, Austrian, and Japanese universities as lecturer, associate professor, and director of an international study center. As second speaker, I'd like to introduce to you Joanna. She's based in France as an administrator in the Language Policy Unit of the Council of Europe and is responsible for the CEFR and all related tools and documents as part of the overarching program, including all languages in and for education. And we'll start off with you, Susanna.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so hello everybody on this beautiful Saturday afternoon, really. I hope you also enjoy good weather, as we do here in Graz. Now, we're a little bit, last comes first. We envisaged having Joanna first, but now I will start with my overview, and then Joanna will come in, I understand. Now, let me just start by saying that I'm really overwhelmed by the huge participation in this conference, by the strong and interesting contributions of so many partners, really, of the ECML and the Language Policy Unit in Strasbourg. I must say that I did not expect it. When I saw the program first, I already knew that there's going to be very strong representation, but this is really almost a Council of Europe conference, which I did not expect first when we talked about doing an online conference on the Common European Framework of Reference for Languages. So this is just to say that it's a unique and a very special opportunity. It's also pointing at something that may, in future, that we may want to look at, and that's the fact that there's another big organization, a big European organization out there. It's the European Union, and has been mentioned on various occasions, and in one particular case, the ECML and the European Union, and on even beyond this particular project, I think it would be useful to consider in future closer cooperation with the European Union, in particular when it comes to further development with the CEFR. But let me now just give you a brief overview of the issues that I intend to touch upon. It's issues that came up during this conference. I must admit it's also issues that I've prepared, obviously. And I will follow with national priorities of representatives in educational ministries, relevant areas of ECML expertise, relevant in terms of when we look at the years to come with regard to possible further developments for the CEFR, and then the next steps, so it does become concrete. So let's look at the needs, and most of those needs have really been mentioned in the course of this conference. It's migration, it's mobility, ICT, lifelong learning, intercultural dialogue, qualification frameworks. All this is the bigger context in modern societies, in advanced societies in Europe. And even though many of those issues like migration or mobility are not really new to Europe, These issues are fairly high up on the agenda in ministries, in people's awareness, I would say. And thus, I think this needs to be addressed in education, and education needs to be prepared to respond appropriately in order to prepare students, learners in schools to be able in future to contribute to these developing societies in Europe. Let's look at schools. One issue that hasn't been mentioned too much in the course of this conference is the language learning at primary level. And maybe I just use this opportunity. Is there anybody in the audience directly involved in primary language learning? If you could type that into your chat. Is anybody teaching at primary level? I wonder if somebody's responding to that. Certainly, there's an increased. There are more and more activities in introducing languages at a very early stage. And secondly, a concrete need in schools is better and stronger support for plurilingual and intercultural education. And this is looking at classrooms where we have, I just look at a school next door, they claim to have more than 90% of non-Austrian German speakers, students with a non-Austrian background in their school. And this becomes is already a reality in many, many European schools. So there's a great mix of languages and cultures in schools, and teachers need to be better prepared for such an education or such a context in order to provide relevant education. To prepare all students of all backgrounds for a positive career in our countries. Now, improving learning, this has a wider context. It's improving learning at all stages, at all levels. It's about using the CEFR for learning, teaching and assessment, and David Little yesterday has made it very clear that there's no use in isolating assessment from learning and teaching. It all comes together, and it needs to be looked at in a coherent way so that we can provide a coherent approach to learning, teaching and assessment. Promoting autonomous learning, lifelong learning and reflective practice, I think these are all issues that are, as I said, high up on the agenda. Certainly with stakeholders, the ECML works with directly. Now, I would like to continue to speak a little bit about so-called national priorities in language education, and for this purpose, I would just briefly like to recall the structure, the institutional structure of the ECML, just for you to know who our direct partners are. We are speaking of 32 countries, 32 European countries being member states at the ECML, and these countries are represented at a governing board, and the delegates are coming usually from ministries of education. So it's really the national educational authorities who are our direct partners who come to Graz, meet once a year, and all our activities, all our programs are discussed with them, and they need to approve those activities. They provide the funding for the activities. So we also must be relevant to those national educational ministries. We have nominating authorities. In my introductory presentation, I've mentioned the fact that for all our workshops, we get nominated representatives from all our member states. In every country, we have a so-called contact point, and that is usually networks, national language centers, who have accepted to take over the task of disseminating information about the ECML in the national context. And there's a strong Austrian representation with the ECML. We have a so-called professional network forum, and that means that once a year we are inviting major European and international language-related associations to come to Graz and to discuss with us the burning issues in language education. And last but not least, as I mentioned yesterday, it's a small, very small secretariat. If we now look closer at what our national representatives from ministries have identified as so-called national priorities in their countries in language education, I would just like to briefly mention that at the moment we are in the phase of preparing the next ECML program, which actually starts not in 2015 but in 2016. There's a typo there. 2016 to 2019. So we are now in a phase where we are identifying those national priorities, and obviously this comes together with priorities of language professionals. And we are discussing those with our governing board members in order to outline the context and relevant developments for each of the topics identified, and in order to indicate what and we also ask the governing board members to indicate what the added value, what the benefit, and what kind of impact the country for the country there would be if such a topic were to be included in an ECML program. Now, may I just use the opportunity to ask you, are you aware of national priorities in language education in your country? I'm not sure if you've prepared the question as a poll question, just to get some feedback on the link of professionals and national authorities in their country. Since most of you, obviously, you're coming from the professional, from the language teaching and teacher training side, are you aware of national priorities in your country? If there's no poll, maybe you can type that into the chat. Right, so I will very briefly introduce you to some of those priorities that have been that were mentioned so far. We got feedback from 17 countries so far, and please have a look at this list. On top of the list there's teacher training. And the areas to which this teacher training is linking up to is really very much the in-service teacher training, but also pre-service teacher training enabling teachers to respond to the diversity of learners in classrooms. Again, the plurilingual and the intercultural dimension is coming up here. So really teacher training covering all levels of education, and covering the broad variety of teaching contexts, going beyond the formal context, reaching out to the informal, non-formal context as well. The CEFR, as you can see, was mentioned quite a few times in those lists of national priorities of member states, and also the ELP. Despite the fact that yesterday we heard that some or many countries in Europe may not be ready yet for the comprehensive pedagogical and education, for the comprehensive approach the ELP provides. The ELP was indeed or is indeed mentioned by quite a few countries, by representatives of educational ministries, as a topic they want to explore in the ECML's next program. So it will stay on the agenda as it looks like at the moment, and we will certainly take on board some of the ideas discussed yesterday by both Grete Nesveda and David Little in order to possibly provide easier access to the ideas represented in the ELP. Then plurilingualism came up frequently in those national priorities, again linking up to the teacher training need, but also mentioned as a topic as such in the context of intercultural learning, developing competences for both plurilingual and intercultural communication. I've briefly referred to the young learners area. many countries start introducing foreign languages at a very early stage in primary or even pre-primary, and therefore, again, teacher training is important, and the quality of teacher training program in this particular context was also an issue that is of concern to many authorities in our member states. ICT, it's last on the list here, but it's certainly not last on the list of priorities of member states. ICT was frequently mentioned in our discussions, highlighting the fact that not only teachers, students need to benefit from the new media. They need not only to be prepared to deal in future effectively with new media, to communicate through those media, but also to use those media in the learning process. So certainly ICT will be strongly represented in the next program. You may also look at this list as, let's say, a range of topics that in a way come together. It's not separated, isolated issues listed here. You could easily envisage an ELP that brings together all those issues or all those themes listed here. Certainly teacher training is a transversal topic for all of those themes, and we will continue working together both with our national authorities and with the professionals, working directly with us, and you've seen and you've listened to quite a few of ECML coordinators, project coordinators, former project coordinators, and those will be our direct discussion, and these people will be our direct discussion partners when it comes to developing the next ECML program. Let me give you a few more concrete examples of such national priorities. And I've selected those examples targeting directly the CEFR. Sweden, for example, says that they need support for training of primary teachers for using the CEFR and the ELP-based approaches in classroom. So here you see a clear link between the two instruments, and this is a link as seen by the national authorities, and I think this is a very encouraging signal. It's not looking at the CEFR in isolation, but at possibilities to introduce the CEFR philosophy in classroom-based approaches, introducing autonomous learning, the lifelong learning approach, and all the educational approaches represented in the ELP. Romania, for example, asked for support for assessment of language competences linked to the CEFR for the quality of assurance of testing. So there's a stronger emphasis on the outcomes and output of the learning process. And maybe Romania is just mentioned here as one country standing in for some others, having a focus on the testing, on the quality of testing theme. It comes probably in the context of competence-oriented teaching and learning, with a clear focus on what actually do we get then at a given stage in the learning process. How can we label it? How does it? In which way can it indicate standards established by a Ministry of Education, for example? Let's look at Montenegro. Learn autonomy, learning to learn strategies, and again the ELP was mentioned here by the representative of the Ministry of Education. Again, you see the strong link to issues mentioned throughout the conference. Finland, finally, interculturality in language education. They explicitly mention KRAP, the FREPA instrument, to be introduced as a whole school approach. So clearly there's a strong interest in looking at languages as such rather than going directly into the teaching and learning of particular language, and an interest to use the FREPA approach as presented by Michel a few moments ago, in order to use such approaches not in the one class, in the foreign language class only, but in order to use this approach for the benefit of all students in a school. So this is a list of some examples of countries' priorities. And I wonder again if your country is represented here, and if not, the question to you, is there communication in your country about national priorities? Are these priorities discussed in professional networks? And in which way then are these discussions having an impact on teacher training, for example, or on actual classroom teaching? But maybe these questions can be discussed at the end of this presentation. Now, relevant areas of ECML expertise when it comes to developments, I would just like to simply say that in a few months' time there will be a new publication, a new ECML publication entitled Language Descriptors for Migrant and Minority Learner Success in Compulsory Education. Now, this is looking at the subject classroom. And I think yesterday in one of my first polls I asked the audience whether there would be any subject teacher, and the response, I think, was no. Still, we do know that obviously languages do play a role not only in the foreign language classroom, but in every classroom. So this particular publication will look at the math and the history classroom at a specific age group, 11, 12, 15, 16, so lower and upper secondary. And this publication will then present descriptors in 6 languages, descriptors of language competences necessary for learners, necessary to have in order to be successful in those subjects, in the learning of these subjects. Obviously, this is most relevant for migrant and minority learners, but it may also be relevant for learners coming from a background of the national language, majority language, probably from representing a vulnerable learner group. Thus, this list of descriptors will enable teachers to better respond to needs of their learners with respect to language competences. This is a publication coming up. It will certainly be available by the end of the year at the ECML website, on the ECML website. Now, projects developing new materials and tools. This is looking forward. This is looking at the next program. And I think looking at the ECML expertise available, and you have seen many presentations today and yesterday, we certainly have a clear and very strong expertise with us when it comes to plurilingual and intercultural competences, or when it comes to the domain of plurilingualism and intercultural education. And certainly the Karat FREPA instrument is a very nice instrument that would be suitable, as Michel has outlined it, to be looked at in order to clearly link those descriptors available to CEFR descriptors. And that would really bridge a gap or close a gap even in terms of plurilingual and intercultural competences, which as such are not represented in the CEFR. Then another possible work of area for the ECML would be the learning to learn strand, developing practical pathways for language learning competences. The question there would be, is it possible to identify descriptors for the language learning process, which would in a way complement the descriptors which are there, the descriptors looking at certain at outputs, at language learning outputs. So that, I think, would be an interesting area of work for the ECML. And a third area is listed here, that's the development of a reference tool for teacher competences. Now, there are already quite a few tools out there, available tools on websites, like, for example, an ECML publication, the European Portfolio for Student Teachers of Languages. Only recently there was another tool published, the European Profiling Grid, the result of a project of quite a few European associations like Equals. The Goethe Institute was included or involved in the development of this tool. Certainly a tool worthwhile looking at. I mentioned it again, the European Profiling Grid. If you now look at all these tools available, I still see the need to bring those tools closer together. On the occasion of one presentation, I was asked, are we really expected as teacher educators to go from the CEFR to CARAP, to EPOSTL, to the European Profiling Grid in order to bring things together and to have a coherent approach to teacher training? So I think there's really a need out there to bring things together and to link it closer to the CEFR. Now, all these ideas have been discussed with our experts, it has been discussed with our governing board, and it looks like indeed the need is recognized and it may be represented in the next ECML program. Just very briefly, another area of expertise that I'd like to highlight here, the notion of mediation, which is there in the CEFR when it comes to mediating between interlocutors of two or more languages. The ECML has adopted this notion of mediation, but it has put it, let's say, at a higher level in the context of mediating between countries, mediating between a European institution like the ECML and users in member states. You could say that even translation plays a role here, and translation is the key example for the mediation in the CEFR. Mediation meaning that ECML publications in some cases, or even in many cases, actually should be translated into the national languages so that they get mentioned by, so that they get used, or they are being applied and implemented in national educational contexts. And ECML has or is coordinating at the moment a variety of mediation projects, and some of those have been presented. Again, the training and consultancy, which has been mentioned, is available for member states, and this is actually a possibility of getting direct support by the ECML through the ECML experts in national contexts. Now, the next steps for the ECML will be the finalization of a call for submissions, a call for proposals for the next program. This will be published in the winter. In this winter, a deadline for submissions will be next May 2015. And in autumn 2015, we'll have finalized our selection process. And in November 2015, there will be the first meeting of new project coordinators. And maybe some of you are considering to contribute to the call for submissions, to submit a proposal, and I would be very happy to work with you, and that is really an opportunity then to look forward, to look at many of the issues that have been raised in these 2 days of the conference, and it will be a possibility to move things forward. Many of the things launched within the CEFR and we are here to support member states and to support your activities as teachers, as teacher educators, in order to move forward education, language education in Europe. May I just finish with a final question for you? And again, I don't know if the poll would be available. The question to you would be, do you think that ECML work can help in making good use of the CEFR? So again, the question, do you think that ECML work can help in making good use of the CEFR? Thank you, Heike. This poll. I'd be happy to receive any comments. My name and my email address is available on the ECML website. This is, as I said, it's a unique opportunity to be in touch directly with teachers, teacher educators. So please don't hesitate to raise concerns, to put up wishes, and you can be sure that I will be looking at those. We will be discussing them, since it's really for you, for teachers and educators, teacher educators, that we are here for, in order for everybody to benefit from our work. Thanks.